worked in a secret space program, and I have a lot to say. So, please, bear with me. It will become clear that what I have to say is of utmost importance to everyone on this planet. I will take questions after I put my ideas down, and I will try to answer all questions fully. When I graduated high school in 2011, I knew I wanted to study computer science, electrical engineering, and physics. I also thought a lot about continuing a military legacy in my family. My older brother, dad, and his dad were all enlisted. My highest grades were in these areas. My school was lucky to have a computer science course before it was as common as it is now. But I never really struggled in school in general. I was enrolled in JROTC for a short time and was recognized for leadership with various accolades. This put me on a path to a military education, and even though I was unsure about a military career, this path was inviting and already open. Immediately after graduation, I went into the U.S. Air Force Academy for physics and eventually graduated with a major in aeronautical engineering. I was in the top 5% of the class. I made Dean's List, with most of my projects involving satellite design and space operations research. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant following graduation from the academy, with an Air Force specialty code, an Air Force Space Command. In a few weeks, I started undergraduate space training for about a year, attending the Space Operations Officer course at Vandenberg Space Force Base, focusing on orbital mechanics, satellite operations, and space surveillance. My first assignment started in 2016 with a satellite control squadron. My unit was the 50th Space Wing, Schriever Air Force Base. I was promoted to first lieutenant and then captain by 2020. There, I contributed to the Space Fence program and assisted with development on the X-37 vehicle series. This period coincided with the founding of U.S. Space Force. With this, the Space Command structure shifted to the Space Control Squadron organization. I transferred from the U.S. Air Force to the USSF with a promotion as an 04, or a major, with a focus on space operations and technology acquisition. My first assignment within USSF was the Space Operations Command. In about 14 months, I was promoted to 05, or Lieutenant Colonel, and placed in a command of a Space Operations Squadron. We managed launches, monitored satellite constellations in real time, and etc. One of the first major operations we did was to monitor China's ongoing Taogong assembly launches. At this point, I was being vetted for the Air War College and participated in collaborative missions with private sector entities like SpaceX and Boeing. Many around me believed that I was on the path to Chief of Space Operations, a position that would have involved a promotion to full colonel, with general on the horizon. I ultimately decided against pursuing this, since the position is not vacant and there's no obvious time when it will be. However, I didn't alert any of my career aides on this decision, and continued to accept new commissions. Around this time, late 2022, 2023, I was vetted for a secret USSF organization. Let's call it Advanced Off-World Operations Command, or AOOC. It's not the real name, but it's kind of similar. This group, unlike most USSF organizations, did not report directly to the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff and the National Security Council. They have total classification authority and inhabit need-to-know privileged segments of intelligence authority. They answer to another, similarly secretive group that, by all measures, appeared totally clandestine and did not have any apparent obligations under information or classification law. These are my assumptions, anyway. Even in my organization, only the Supreme Commander and Deputy Operations Commander, and myself, knew of the existence of this body that served us orders regularly. In the interest of protecting myself, I will not expand further on my career. I intentionally changed a few important details to prevent my person from being identified. However, I believe I provided sufficient information to dispel any questions concerning my legitimacy. My first day at AOOC began with an unraveling of the ongoing military and scientific operations occurring beyond Earth. Moving forward, I will identify all aspects of the Black Off-Road program as being part of AOOC, although this is not really the case. In reality, there are several compartmentalized organizations that conduct these operations. The first thing that really shocked me was how these operations are conducted in a way allowing them to remain totally hidden from the public and lower-tier military organizations. A lot of this is very subversive and damaging. I learned that some instruments, including JWST, had been deemed conflicts of interest with my organization. And to the dismay of NASA, many aspects of the mission were scaled back and delayed. Many in NASA think the final mission that JWST is allowed to perform is basically pointless. That's how broadly its capabilities were reduced. It's obvious that without these measures, many telescopes would represent an existential risk to off-road operations. The moment I realized exactly what was happening to civilian space exploration, how it's being targeted by not just our organization, but similar groups led by our adversaries, I began to wake up to my role in these programs. If you are reading between the lines here, and you understand the difficulties JWST faced before and during its early mission, your paranoid thought is, most likely, true. We did quote-unquote similar things to the unmanned Orion lunar flyby mission, and various other measures to reduce the lifespan of the ISS. You can also attribute the defunding and eventual destruction of Arecibo with these concerns. More than a few of the now famous signals that have been presented as SETI candidates were in fact leak signals from off-world operations. There is much more information about these operations than I have time to discuss in detail. So, I will work through them, starting with those on and nearby Earth, and moving deeper into space. There is a network of underground facilities across Western Europe and mostly in the eastern US, with a transcontinental line connecting all of them running under the seafloor, that are revealed to people in these organizations on a need-to-know basis. The President is aware of one of these, operated by the State Department serving as a doomsday shelter for Congress and other elected officials. Several presidents have actually spent time here and delivered addresses from it when global tensions were high. During the first 4 weeks of the Ukraine invasion, these facilities were more heavily used than any other time in the last few decades. This network provides the industrial base necessary for ground-launched operations. Most of the emissions produced are from the biggest industrial center located at the South Pole. You can actually see these emissions from almost any geospatial service offering atmospheric analysis. This is called black terrestrial infrastructure. Secret launch facilities. There are several of these, mostly served by submarine bases and the aforementioned underground tunnels. The tunnels tend to be used to transport materials, and submarines transport staff. The largest and oldest facility is located on the South Pole with several independent launch pads that are used seasonally depending on ice conditions. These are built so that when the ice shelf recedes, they are still covered in a column of water between 50 to 100 meters. This prevents detection by satellite and allows ships to be launched through the water like an SLBM. Overland facilities are concealed by placing them in wilderness regions with heavy camouflaging. If you are older, you will remember the English TV show Thunderbirds, where they had an island that looked natural, but the ground opens up to reveal an underground base. These facilities are very impressive and well protected. Launches take place in coordination with SpaceX launches to add plausible deniability if the vehicles are spotted by amateurs. Division 1, LEO. Due to the density of private satellites in LEO, there is little interest in maintaining advanced platforms here. There are a few satellites concealed as civilian, with various sensors for detecting and monitoring underground facilities. High orbits. This is where a constellation of platforms known as the Orbital Defense Perimeter, or ODP, operates. These are unmanned platforms with nuclear pump-directed energy weapons like the Casaba howitzers designed for SDI, Star Wars. Ironically, the ODP really has no part in keeping things out of Earth orbit, and mostly exists to keep things in. It is very common for these platforms to interdict scientific probes launched by adversary nations and damage them, as well as the obvious role of keeping adversaries from building their own orbital military infrastructure. Some of these installations date back to the early 1970s and have been refitted extensively. Orbital Black Ops. The function of the OBO arm is not dissimilar to the ODP discussed above, but is led by a constant human presence in space instead of being automated. Most of what they do is related to intelligence and management, but they do have several reaction forces that can reach any location in Earth's sphere of influence very quickly. These forces are trained for zero-gravity combat and are deployed to sabotage installations and satellites when a finer touch is needed. As far as I'm aware, the OBO sometimes works in conjunction with the CIA and the NRO, though, as mentioned earlier, this is never a two-way stream of accountability or information. Division 2. Advanced Starship Command, or ASC. ASC manages commissioning, training, and deployment of officers aboard starships, capable of interstellar travel, and conducts missions in the outer planets. They are capable of infiltration, combat operations, and rescues in space or on other planets. There are basically two distinct types of ships used by the ASC: Phantoms and Sentries. Their design is identical but scaled to very different sizes. These Phantom ships are between 800 to 1200 meters, and the Sentries are 60 to 80 meters. Without depth perception, they appear identical. Phantoms have the designation OXS and are interstellar capable. The crews are trained for a very long time and develop biological synergy with the vehicles that allow them to function. Theory of operation of the interstellar drive is difficult to explain even with my physics background. It uses photon adsorption to accelerate photons in a small area, and tricks space-time into thinking this volume is traveling in its own isolated reference frame. The drive produces a lot of photons, and adsorbs all of them in a circuit of beryllium and mercury. The mercury condenses after absorbing enough protons to pump up its electron shell, and releases time-reversed photons back into the drive. Again, basic theory of operation for this system is a 49-page document, and it's not really digestible in a single sitting. The Sentries lack an interstellar drive, and instead operate a cluster of electrogravitic drives that work by coupling with planetary electrical and gravitational fields. Most of this is quote-unquote accepted as standard model physics. ASC ships have water and solid-state fusion reactors. They carry defensive shields that also function as offensive weapons by employing the time-reversed photon principle. All of these systems are managed by biological wetware systems that are partially conscious and interface with computers. Humans can plug into these systems. The biological component either originates with a human, Phantoms, or a 7-armed octopus, Sentries. The latter is more unreliable and is not used in direct interface with a pilot, while the Phantom systems require a human pilot for navigation. The Sentries mostly use this biological component to manage the fusion reactors and defensive armaments. Division 3. Extraterrestrial Threat Response. Part of the reason why this experience has been so eye-opening to me was a process that was put into motion the very first time I became aware of ETR's existence. When you see that phrase across the top of a document and start digesting the capabilities of this organization and its legacy, it's a daunting thing. The first iteration of the ETR began long before my career or the founding of the USSF, and is more akin to the legacy of the US Air Force. We've had military space capability since the 1950s, and our Earth-bound adversaries have had it since the 1930s. Anyone would respond to seeing these words with great expectation, if not outright existential terror. I considered the possibility of these organizations not existing at all, and being part of a psychological fitness test to see if I would ask too many questions about this secret alien war. It turned out there's no war at all. I'll expand on this later, but I think it's important to say up front how much of this activity in space is actually very similar to the political posturing that occurs on Earth between nations that perceive themselves as empires, whose needs transcend all other concerns. This division coordinates first contact protocols, intelligence gathering on extraterrestrial technologies, and, if necessary, the deployment of new defensive space assets. They have access to the most destructive weapons in the arsenal, such as antimatter weapons. I will note that antimatter weapons have only been tested at very small scale. Solar flares were used to mask these tests from detection. As I said before, there is no real warfare between humans and extraterrestrials. Warfare implies a political and diplomatic vector that does not exist. This entire issue cannot be summarized by diplomatic, military, or even political thinking. There is an ontological disconnect that humans have when they try to understand ETI across the board, and this is why the mission of the AOOC has not yielded any progress towards understanding extraterrestrial life for its entire history. Humans are still functioning in the paradigm where an ET vehicle penetrating our personal space is instant grounds to react with military capability. These beings do not see space we inhabit as human, since they do not have a sense of a species' right to lay claim to what is nature. They absolutely comprehend that we are territorial, but they simply don't see that as a good reason for respecting our boundaries, when they operate on another level of laws that place the order of the universe above their ambitions. It's the same reason why they continue to operate around Earth peacefully, while we attack them in quote-unquote self-defense. They have accepted a paradigm where the cost of losing a single-purpose designed probe to our overzealous military is infinitesimal compared to their capability and wisdom. We are taking a bucket of water out of the ocean to punish that ocean for getting us wet. That's how I see it anyway. There has never been loss of life or property as a result of confrontations with entities beyond Earth. This brings us to the ongoing broader spectrum operations. Some of these involve the OBO and the ASC, Extraterrestrial Research Program. ERP is, ironically, the most active on Earth. They are one of the least clandestine, interacting with the CIA and public research science on occasion. This is unfortunately also where a lot of experimentation on human sociology, psychology, and genetics is being done. A lot of the intelligence work organizing the UFO narrative is being orchestrated by ERP. They conduct UFO false flag operations and collect genetic material from the public, while also employing trauma programming techniques at scale. They have access to all of the high technology of the AOOC, allowing them to appear as ETI. As far as I know, the most dramatic operations carried out by this group have involved transportation of abductees and other planets in order to solidify a false ET experience in the mind of a highly important person. Project Bright Horizon. This is an operation focused on the defense of Earth's strategic assets from extraterrestrial or deep space adversaries. They call the shots for destruction of ET assets that stray too close to orbit. Most recent ships in the ASC were commissioned as part of muster efforts in Bright Horizon. Most of the outer planet's infrastructure was also created as part of this project in order to allow development of deep space industry. Space Intel Division. All information relating to the activities of AOOC are stored in data black sites at various Lagrange points around the system. These are quantum computer databases that function with a technology called Aurora, which allows energetic particles in the magnetic reconnection regions of planets with magnetic fields to be observed as a means to transmit data. Apparently, there is a natural entanglement effect that we take advantage of. These databases are redundant, so the quote-unquote safest ones at the edge of the system are updating in constant real-time with data feeds set up on Earth. This system forms the backbone of interstellar communication as well, though in practice this has been more difficult. Planetary systems must be magnetically connected to communicate in this way, and only nearby stars have this link. There are several major off-world installations, with the smallest being manned stations that serve as way stations for interstellar traffic and launches from Earth. The largest of these have just under 200 crew. The Moon has two widely dispersed facilities. On the facing side in the Kepler-Dorsum region, there is a concealed launch complex. This is linked via underground rail lines to a small factory that draws resources from gas and liquid stockpiles, occupying several dozen kilometers of lava tubes. There have been occasions when weather conditions have been manipulated to reduce visibility of the Moon during high-tempo operations. On the dark side, there is a smaller legacy base built in the early 1970s. This site is no longer active and mostly serves to protect abandoned facilities left by the Soviets. It's possible other nations or older groups have similarly decrepit bases, though I've never confirmed this. There are a few other infrastructure features on the Moon, a network of several million, small cubesats that provide real-time monitoring of the Moon at centimeter resolutions. There are also long tethers that sit in orbit and use electrogravitic effects to spin and change altitude. These are used to boost cargo into transfer orbits with Earth and Mars, and also to receive cargo. After all that fucking nonsense, a few people in the thread start asking questions. In your opinion, what is the best chance for civilians to create an equivalent to the secret space program without getting black-bagged and banned? Say you were already in contact with the telepathic ETS and not in league with any secret societies, governments, or military programs. If nothing else, the entity exists to perpetuate itself beyond all other commitments. In other words, an equivalent will never be created while it continues to exist. I think the obvious way towards progress is for the civilian sector to invite ET contact collectively. They will absolutely show up for us. They are more interested in us than most people believe. The pattern of behavior is interesting. ETI has been making itself visible to us and collecting data about our planet for as long as we've been able to identify them. It's not just humans they're interested in, but the unique planet that produced us. They don't care if we swat away their hand. They simply want us to continue our progress, with or without them. Only an insanely paranoid person would see this behavior as a threat. Someone else asks, I want to know more specifically about phantoms and sentries. How do humans interface with them? Why was the octopus chosen for the smaller one, if at all? Wouldn't human intelligence be a better suitor in any case if it's available? And here's a curveball. What's going on beneath the Earth's surface? The interface is achieved through electrical stimulation of the brain, like reverse EEG. Time-reversed electromagnetic waves are used to trigger specific synapses, and they actually have to map out all of the pilot's brain's neurons to make this work. This doesn't take very long, all things considered. As I understand it, the seven-armed octopus has a lot of unexpressed genes that allow its neurological faculties to handle behaviors that are seen in octopi. I'm not a biologist, so forgive me. Complex cephalopods like octopi have a type of perception about the world around them that is highly refined. Their large number of limbs and near weightless evolutionary environment makes them well suited for spatial comprehension. Apparently, it's also easier to tap into the nervous system of an octopus than a human, because the octopus can be put into a coma and used, while a human has to be surgically disassembled. OP, why are ETS interested in Earth and humans? From how you describe it, it seems like they look at humans like we look at chimps. although worse, since our values and chimp values have significant overlap, but ETs seem to have different values. Why would they be okay with dying just to see some chimps? As I said earlier, there's a disconnect between how they see us and how we see ourselves. They don't see us as simple, disposable beings, but rather, dignified citizens of a higher order that they treat with intense respect. It's a precious analogy, but consider a young king and his sphere of aides that both advise him and raise him. In days past, when a king was crowned at a young age, a temple would be built dedicated to the young man's education across science, spirituality, and government. Careful measures have to be taken to foster a great civilization without allowing it to become misguided. That's how I see it anyway. It's not how a lot of people see it. OP, are there multiple species or factions trying to influence us and our development? Are we part of some great game? I know you've said that ETs are non-hostile and don't view politics the same way that we do, but I'm just trying to make sure you're not leaving something out. It's a complicated question. Certain avenues can communicate the ideas very quickly, but words are not one of those avenues. Think about factions being one-dimensional. We have humans who fight ourselves, and we have ETI that do not fight themselves. Presumably, we also have ETI that fight themselves. Now go up a dimension. Look at the causes for the formation of these factions. Humans question themselves. We overstep nature. We allow preconceptions to hold us back. The ETI doesn't hold back. But what prevents them from destroying us is that they don't overstep nature. We can assume any other ETI that still acts like humans are still on their planet duking it out, and aren't visiting us in important numbers, considering how huge time it is for beings like humans. That's the second dimension. The ideas that put us in our factional categories. Now, go up another dimension, and you have an order. Laws of nature that say civilizations that struggle with understanding their place in nature will never endanger other civilizations. And those who achieve true understanding of technology and do not overstep nature naturally become supporters of those lesser civilizations of future promise. There, I fucking narrated this fucking word spaghetti of without fucking accused of AI generated fucking hoobla boobla. Some fucking dork just opened an encyclopedia and was like, how about I replace this word with this word? How can I make myself sound smarter? Fuck. Damn, this story pissed me off. And you guys won't know. My editor's gonna clean out all of my bitching.